Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the AHEPA family of Hempstead, proudly presenting the Hellenic History Series, Alexander the Great. I'd like to welcome you all for being here this evening. I'd like to tell you that tonight we're going to be discussing Alexander the Great in the Hellenic History Series, featuring Vassilios Billy Chrissochos as the presenter, followed by questions and answers, which we'll be doing in the chat section of the actual go-to meeting. So if you look at your top right taskbar, you'll see a captioning. If there's a question that you have, I'll kindly ask you to put the question into the actual chat bar, and at the end of the lecture series, we will go through them and I will ask the questions to the presenter. I'd also like to let you know a few things about the presenter this evening. He'll be talking about Alexander the Great, the philosopher, king, hero, and legend. And the aspects he will be covering will be the military achievements and campaigns in brief of how he was represented, Plato and Aristotle's ideal leadership qualities, and how he became even more legendary in the Byzantium times in the Alexander romance. What I'd like to also let you know tonight is that Vassilios Billy Chrissochos is a historical consultant who has been given presentations on various Hellenic-themed subjects, such as the historical significance of OHI, Byzantium Macedonian Dynasty, Byzantium for beginners, Cleopatra VII, visionary queen of Alexander the Great's Hellenistic age, 1821, the liberation of Greece, and tonight, Alexander the Great, philosopher, king, hero, and legend, amongst many others. He is the primary composer, historical consultant, and producer of Porphyra, and a musical, Anna and Vladimir, which debuted at Carnegie Hall Off-Broadway, set in the year 988 AD. The story chronicles Princess Anna Porphyrogenita and her marriage to Grand Prince Vladimir of the Kievan Rus. Vassilios also runs the Hellenic History Series channel across YouTube, Facebook, and Patreon. The channel began as a tool to educate. It features original programming such as the Quest for the Prometheus, which searches for the truth in history and modern politics, Greek cooking, and Porphyra's music shows. Now the channel is becoming the online video archive for rare and forgotten gems of Greek-inspired films, animated shows, concerts, and documentaries, shows for our younger viewers and the entire family. Our motto, look to the past to unlock the future. Vassilios Chrissochos is the AHEPA District 6 Director of Culture and Arts for all of New York. He's also a past director of Hellenism. He is also the AHEPA Hermes Chapter 186 of Astoria, Queens, New York, Vice President. He is the UNESCO 𝘾𝙧𝙞𝙀𝙧 New York Director of Modern Music and awarded music video editor and member of ASCAP. He founded the Greek Artists Guild, the Hellenic American Center of the Arts, and the Alexander the Great Living Historical Society with his wife Despina. They founded Porphyra Foundation, which aims to promote cross-cultural education through compassionate and inspirational works. He is also a realtor with Metropolis Realty, and he has a BA in political science, history, and a minor in education from Queens College. For those of you who received the emails, you can also click on his links at billychrysochos.com, porphyrafoundation.org, and the YouTube. You'll be able to look at it as youtube.com/user Kalavrita1821. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over the floor to Brother Billy Vassilios Chrissochos. Brother Billy, welcome, and thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate it. It's great to have you back, and we're very excited to hear this series tonight. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you very much for having me again, Brother Anastasi and the great Cassis chapter and AHEPA family of Hempstead. It feels like my second home. being with all of you. And today is going to be a very sort of informal discussion on Alexander the Great, why he is remembered and why he should be remembered, and how we can pass this knowledge to our children, because that's very important. He is a hero and somebody that has to be emulated and look up to. And we're going to just basically run a little bit about his life, some of the campaigns, and throughout history, how his image has transcended into almost the heroic figure of every culture in the known world and beyond that.
Great. It sounds fantastic. We can't wait. So without further ado, please.
All right. So you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
PowerPoint. Okay. So Alexander the Great, Philosopher King, Hero, and Legend is the title of tonight's theme. He is, after all, a hero. He is one of the greatest generals that ever lived, who never lost a battle, and he became a legend. There's more to his story after his death, thousands of years later, than even when he was alive. You know, he's a living legend, and he's also something that, according to Arrian and the original sources, and as being Aristotle's tutor, he was a philosopher king. He was one of the first, and we're going to just touch a little bit about all of that. So let's see here. Of course, Alexander the Great is from Macedonia, who is an integral part of Greek history. We're going to see throughout this presentation. 𝘾𝙘𝙨𝙨𝙞𝙡𝙾. Macedonia is a part of Greece. Sorry there. So according to the geographer and philosopher and historian Strabo, this is a quote. We going to kind of intertwine Macedonia and what's going on with Alexander the Great, and why Macedonia is very important throughout all of history, and especially Greek history. So the role of Macedonia throughout Greece, we're going to see now in this presentation how the founding of the ancient kingdom Macedonia started, and Alexander the Great's campaigns. There's four main ones. We're going to discuss just a little bit about Byzantium's Alexander romance, something very, very interesting, and how Alexander the Great is viewed in modern times and in media. And here is a brief timeline of Greece's epic history, just to get you up to speed. From 9000 BC, Minoans, Mycenaeans, and all that, to classical Greece of 500 BC to 336 BC, and approximately from 356 BC to 10 AD is the Hellenistic age. This is the age of Alexander the Great, when the Greeks ruled the world. And this is what we're going to discuss. We're going to kind of look more into the earlier part of the Hellenistic age, but we're going to see how its influence spreads throughout Roman Greece, Byzantine Greece, into modern times with the Macedonian struggle. So here we have the Greeks through the drachma, through our modern, it was the modern currency of Greece. And Alexander the Great is prominent with Constantine the Great and so many other main heroes, gods, myths, and revolutionaries. This is one of my art pieces made out of the coins and the dollars and stamps. And so here we go to the kingdom of Macedon. Just to very briefly, you can see the blue, the dark blue is where Macedon began. With the Macedonians, they're one of the Greek tribes. They're closely, they're Dorians, just like the Spartans. Instead of going south, when the Doric tribes came to that part of Greece, they stayed up there, and the rest went down to the Peloponnese. So Macedon, the dynasty is descended from the royal family of Argos, whose ancestor is Heracles. It's very important. That's one of Alexander the Great's heroes and ancestors. The other being Achilles from his mother's side, which is from Epirus, the Molossian dynasty. So by the 7th century BC, the Macedonian kingdom is established. And then we have the first more historical records, because it was more of a backwards kingdom in the north. Midas I is one of the first kings, 540 to 498 BC. And what I mean, it's a backwards kingdom. These people in northern Greece, the Greeks there lived in kingdoms, like in the Homeric age. They were behind. So when the southern Greeks, the city-states, talked about the northern Greeks, they viewed them as backwards because they lived like they lived in the Trojan War times. That's what we mean. And they had kingdoms. They didn't have democracy, oligarchies, or other forms of government that the southern Greek city-states had. And again, they were not city-states, they were kingdoms. Macedonia, Thrace, Thessaly, and Epirus were kingdoms. And Philip II, Alexander the Great's father, takes over in 360 until his death in 336 BC from an assassination. So Philip II is actually as great as Alexander, or even more, because he's the one that reforms the army, all the institutions of Macedonia. He brings all the philosophers, artists, sculptors from the rest of Greece to enrich this more backwards Greek kingdom, and becomes slowly starts to become a superpower. He learns warfare techniques from the Thebans while he was captured, Philip II, and he improves on the system called the phalanx, which is like a formation with hoplites, people that were dressed in armor, soldiers next to each other with shields and long spears. And he made the sarissa, which is an improvement to the hoplite long spear, from 12 feet to about 16, 18 feet. That was the Macedonian sarissa. That's what improved warfare. And Alexander the Great is born in 336 BC. All right. So, are you guys with me so far?
Yes. Yes.
It's gonna go back and forth. Okay, and I can see everybody. I know we see a few people that are just on audio, which is good. They're just listening in. All right. So, why is Alexander the Great important? Why does he? How does he come about to take over this Macedonian empire and this little backwards kingdom? How come is able to basically, with Alexander, take over the known world? As you can see in this map, Alexander's empire stretches from Greece and the Balkans, southern Italy, all the way to India, what is now modern-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, Egypt, and all the way up to the Caucasus, what is the Ukraine and Russia now. So this is the kingdom of Alexander. Now, what's before him is the Persian kingdom, the Achaemenid dynasty and empire, and it's of the old world before Alexander. It was a superpower, the Persians. And the Persians had visions of more grandeur and to take over these little pesky Greek colonies in the Aegean. And in about 490 BC, at the Battle of Thermopylae, Systemopiles, the hot springs, the hot gates, the Greeks under Leonidas, the Spartans, we all know, the 300 fought to keep them until the Greeks unite to repel the Persians. The Persians were basically taking over Thrace, going to Macedonia, and they were ready to invade Greece because the Greeks were quarreling. They were able to, the Spartans lost, but the Persians were eventually able to be repelled. They came back, they burned Athens and the Acropolis, they caused a lot of mayhem and destruction, but they didn't conquer Greece yet. And 10 years later, at the Battle of Marathon Salamis and Themistocles, they're able to be defeated. So the Great Persian Empire is defeated by these little Greek cities and colonies, because they also had taken over the colonies where now in Asia Minor, on the coast of what is modern day Turkey, right? Those were under the Persian rule, and they wanted independence, and they kept on asking the mainland Greeks, you have to come and free us. So they were unable to free those Greeks in the Ionian coast of Anatolia or Asia Minor. And the Persians eventually never forgot this defeat by the Greeks. And the kings of Persia, every day they used to, especially Darius and Xerxes, they had to be reminded of how they need to crush the Greeks. And they intervened into internal affairs of the Greek city-states and the kingdoms, bribed, much like modern nations do now. The bigger nations, they meddle into the smaller countries into their internal affairs. They did the same, the Persians, and they were pro-Persian camps and the anti-Persian camps. So by the time we come to Macedonia, Philip forms a pan-Hellenic league, which is the first time in history that he unites eventually, after a lot of problems and struggles, all the Greek city-states under him. into a Pan-Hellenic League to finally defeat the Persians, because they were coming back again. This is 100 years later. The Persians never went away, and the Greeks never got to liberate the Ionian colonies. So under Philip, they were able to unite and prepare an expedition to liberate the colonies of Asia Minor from the tyrannical Persian Empire. And why was Persia bad? It was more of a despotic, Eastern, mystical empire. Much like the Egyptians and some of the others from the East, they didn't believe in, they didn't value the human, like individualism, things of that sort. It was more, you work for the king, you die, and if you were not a Persian, you still had to do the work of the Persian king, who was the king of kings. So there were many people and many different peoples in Persia, and the whole empire, from Egypt all the way to the Caucasus, Central Asiatic nomads, early Arab peoples, and so forth. So they were ready to come again. So Philip prepared, and now unfortunately he gets assassinated on the eve of about to leave for Asia Minor, and young Alexander at the age of 20 takes over. Now Alexander, and we'll talk a little bit about a couple of interesting stories about Alexander. He was already a genius. He was a very smart boy. I mean, he was not fully tested to be a king, but he was tested into going into battles with his dad. He did go to the north, and he defeated some of the barbaric tribes of the north. He helped clear Thrace and made some other alliances with the Greco-Illyrian tribes. So he was definitely a good soldier, and he was very smart as early as when he was 12, I believe, in his early teens. There was a famous story of how the Macedonians loved their horses, and actually that was from Thessaly. The Thessalians were the greatest horse breeders of that era, the area as well. And Philip got a black stallion, and the tamers, he went to visit it, and the people that were training him, they couldn't handle him. They couldn't figure out why this horse from these professional people could not be tamed, and therefore to Philip it seemed like a useless waste of money, and he was about to just tell him to get rid of it. Alexander now saw what was bothering the horse, whose name is called Bucephalos, ox head. It was a very big head, very powerful horse, and he saw the value of the horse, and he kind of grew a bond with it right away. And he saw the sun was basically scaring him and blinding him, and he kept on seeing his shadow, and that was frightening Bucephalos. And he turned him away from the sun and rode him off to the sunset, and everybody basically sort of dropped their jaws. They couldn't believe this little boy was able to tame something professional, horse takers couldn't. And he was able to see what was the problem. So he bought the horse, and then Philip was so excited and happy about this young boy, his son, that he told him, my son, Macedonia is too small for you. You have to look for your own kingdom, something of that sort. And those are the kind of stories of young Alexander that, he had interest in diplomacy. When the Persians came to the court of Philip, he listened in. He knew what strangers looked like. He knew the different people of the Persian Empire, of different Greeks, and how their minds worked, and how they handle, trading, and stuff like that, how they were able to deal with each other. So another story is of his birth. The day of his birth, Philip got I think three news that were significant. One, his wife Olympias had a vision of a lion clawing out of her womb, which the seers saw as a very good sign. A lion is always a good sign. Another one is a comet flew over, which is also a good sign. And another one is his horse won in the Olympic Games. So those are three positive things, and he knew that, and everybody around knew that something special was with this new boy that was born. That's on his birth. And actually, the temple of Artemis in Asia Minor burned to the ground from a fire, which to the seers told them that basically Artemis was busy taking care of Alexander, bringing him to life, because she's also a fertility and a caretaker, and she was busy with Alexander's birth that she neglected her own temple. So the comet's another story. I'm sorry, that's not part of Alexander, but it is a temple of Artemis that burns, the horse of Philip that wins in the Olympic Games, and the vision of a lion in Olympia's womb, and he had to seal that in. So this is the signs of somebody that's beyond normal. His intelligence was actually stimulated by Aristotle, who was another Macedonian. A lot of people might not know this. He's born in Stagira in Macedonia. He's not from Athens, so it's not just Alexander. He's also Aristotle, his tutor, who becomes his personal tutor, the greatest philosopher of his time. And he's the one that stimulates Alexander's mind. And this is where the notion of he's grooming a philosopher king comes about. So I'm not making this up. This is actually when we read the original sources, and this is what I recommend to you all. There's something called the Loeb Classical Library, LOEB. These little green books, the Greek ones. About 100 years ago, all the scholars from Oxford, they came and they put all the translations together, and they decided these are the best translations, and they translated the sources. So you have the ancient Greek next to the English, so you can actually follow along what was actually said by Diodorus Siculus, by Arrian, Plutarch, and the Latin author Quintus Curtius Rufus. So these are the four sources that we look when we want to read about Alexander's history, who also come after a few hundred years after Alexander, which is also interesting. But a lot of these early semi-mythical, legendary, people, their histories were written way after, because people already knew all this stuff and things got lost. Who knows what happened? But these are the original sources, and Plutarch, Arrian, and another one, Diodorus Siculus. He's in the later Roman times, which is also most of these authors write about Alexander's history, anecdotes, personal stories, and things of his nature. And we learned that Aristotle was grooming him to be a philosopher king, somebody to rule wise. So, like according to Plato's analogy of the cave, if we're familiar with Plato, who tells an earlier story of Socrates, of how these men that were chained in a dark cave facing a wall, and behind them was this fire, and they were chained, they couldn't see behind them, and people used to walk in front of the fire, and all they saw was shadows, and to them reality was the shadows, until there were three different layers in this cave of different knowledge, and one day somebody was released by somebody. He was helped out, and then he got out of the cave. So the son, scared, came right back. Another person finally was let out, and he was so blinded by the sun, which in this case is knowledge, that when he went back to release some of the other prisoners, they were not so willing to go out into the sun, because when you have knowledge, doesn't mean everybody wants this knowledge, and sometimes it's scary knowing more than more people are capable of understanding. So Aristotle groomed this into him, that to seek the knowledge and the darkness, and to become a better human being, so a better citizen. And he gave him Paideia, which is what ancient Greeks believed in, nurturing the mind, the soul, and the physical being. So he also had a coach. Alexander could play the flute. He could sing. He could dance. He could do a lot. And his best friends were these called the companions. They were Macedonian nobility that followed him to the ends of the world in all his campaigns. Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antiochus, and these are the people that became his best friends, Hephaestion cousins and friends. And he had a very good clique of friends who his parents wisely gave him, just like our parents always try to take care of us, and they make sure as Greek kids we have the best friends that are good, clean. See that happening here too. Alexander's parents cared a lot for his well-being, and they chose his friends, and these friends basically helped him conquer the known world. So when Alexander finally takes over, he leaves from Amphipolis, which is something that was also in the news the past few years. If you remember, the tomb of Amphipolis, or the Casta Amphipolis, the memorial tomb that was discovered, one of the largest of the world, especially in Greece, and we kind of like heard about it. It vanished again from the news. Every time there was something happening with our neighbors in the north, with the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, that will come up in the news, because that's supposedly the royal family was there. Alexander's mother, his son, perhaps his friend Hephaestion, his best friend, or even Alexander. They were discovering sphinxes and things that of enormous scale, because there could only be for somebody like Alexander the Great, and they were from that specific area in 300 BC, which is the time of Alexander's life and period. So Amphipolis is where he leaves off, and they land into Asia Minor, which is what is modern day Turkey now, near Troy. So in Troy, he went to honor. He throws the first spear on the soil, and he goes to honor his other ancestor, Achilles. So Alexander has ancestors, both mythical, semi-legendary, or even if they are real. It's Hercules and Achilles from his two parts of his family, from the Molossian line of Epirus, Olympias, and from the Macedonian line of Argos with Heracles. So this is how Greek the Macedonians are. I mean, this is part of their culture and their lineage. Makedonos means a tall mountain man. That's basically the name Macedonian means. And Makedonos was also an ancestor of the Macedonians, just like the Thracians have Thrax, and so forth. So when Alexander lands in Asia Minor, as we see here, one of the first campaigns that we see is the Battle of Granicus. So he meets Darius II for the first time. This is the king of kings of Persia, who basically sees Alexander as this little annoying brat that he's gonna just get rid of him very quickly, because he's not tried into war. We don't know if Darius was behind with some of the Athenians and other warring, anti-Philip parties behind the assassination. Perhaps his wife Olympias, because at this time Philip was a bit of a womanizer, and he had taken a full Macedonian wife, and they had a daughter, Cleopatra. Alexander, as I mentioned, is half Macedonian and half Epiroti. So and then a little bit of Illyrian. So he's Epiroti and Macedonian. So now Philip was fearing that maybe it's better he has a full Macedonian son, and Olympia saw that as a threat to her son. And she wanted to protect her son. So perhaps she was involved in the assassination of Philip. Perhaps it was the Persians and other rivals of the Macedonians, like the Athenians, who were obviously, when we talk about the Athenians and the Spartans, they're the other big powers of the era that had kind of spent themselves fighting each other through the Peloponnesian Wars. It's a 30-year war that Athens and Sparta fought for supremacy after they beat the Persians. The Athenians win. There's a plague. Pericles dies. Then the Thebans take over, and from the Thebans, eventually Philip takes over. So the Athenians never forgot that they were the superpower, and they always will be a problem to Philip. And there's a very strong anti-Macedonian sentiment in Athens. So perhaps they were behind the assassination as well with the Persians. So there's always this civil war, there's these rivalries in ancient Greece, and it goes back to the Trojan War and beyond that. Obviously, the Peloponnesian Wars were civil war that destroyed Greece after so much greatness, after the classical age that was spawned from Pericles and the Parthenon, the Acropolis, the tragedy, philosophy, science, all that stuff happened during the classical era. But then they killed each other. So the Macedonians saw them as a shield of not only all of Greece, as the avengers of Greece. But they also saw them as superior to the other Greeks. So they would not be liked by the Athenians or the Spartans. The Spartans would not even join Alexander on his march in the Pan-Hellenic Crusade. That's another very famous thing in his dedication and his big shield. Alexander mentions all the city-states that followed him, except for the Lacedaemonians, the Spartans. So we kind of like always worship the Spartans, but the Spartans were not even a part of this mission to avenge Greece. So it's the Macedonians. Anyway, the Battle of Granicus, he wins. Darius is dumbfounded. He thinks it's perhaps luck. He approaches Alexander afterwards and tells him, listen, I'll give you, this side of the Asia Minor, a little bit of land, and don't go any farther. And that should be more than enough for you. Which obviously he didn't mean. He will eventually take that back again. And Alexander saw that, and he's like, you're not my king. I will take you down, and I will become the king of kings. So Darius at this point is a little bit frightened because Alexander wins without losing a single soldier, and he goes on to winning at the next battle. So here, we have. You can see the dates to the right. The next battle is the Battle of Issus, and the dates go down because as we go to birth of Christ, obviously before Christ, the dates will go down. So the Battle of Issus, he wins again, and this is when it becomes very definitive to Darius. So he has a problem now, and Alexander is actually able to defeat Darius in this place in Eastern Asia Minor. There was another port there called Tyre, and it was an island fortress, and he was able to build a moat, like to fill the moat with debris and dirt, and go all the way to the walls of this island fortress, and then basically just take them over. And these were the descendants of I think they were Phoenician or Carthaginian people. They were very brave and very strong, and it was one of the most defendable fortress. And he was able to crush it, and then that's how he beat Darius in his strategic other part. So from then on, he moved on to the Battle of Gaugamela, or Arbela. That's another famous name. And I have a board game here, the Battle of Arbela. And we did a show on my Quest for Prometheus show on the Hellenic History series about this specific battle, and you can see it. It's this, if you see it on Hellenic History series on YouTube. It's the Battle of Arbela. It takes place October 1st, 331 BC. And it basically seals the fate of the Achaemenid Empire, and Darius loses. This is one of my art pieces based on the mosaic of Alexander the Great that they found in Naples. And basically from then on, Darius is running away. And now we're like in Babylon. This is the area. So there were in antiquity there were four main empires. So it's the Egyptians, the Medo-Persians, which is now, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. And there was a vision. This is now where I'll tell you a little biblical tale from the prophet Daniel. The king Nebuchadnezzar had a Mesopotamian king had a nightmare. He had many nightmares, and eventually he asked for a seer, and everybody told him Daniel is one of the best and the prophet, and he'll be able to tell him what the dreams are. Because as I mentioned a little bit before, dreams mean a lot in the ancient world, the Byzantine times, the medieval world. Up to now, people always try to interpret dreams and what they mean. Sometimes they mean something, sometimes it's just mumbo jumbo from your brain as it's inactive and it gets activated at night. But in this dream or nightmare, the king sees. Sorry, we'll go back here. The king of Mesopotamia has a nightmare, Nebuchadnezzar, and he calls on the prophet Daniel to explain to him what this dream is that he sees. It's a series of dreams. There's two, and these are in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Old Testament, in the Bible. One dream is that there's this giant, and he has different
every portion of his body starts with clay, and it's bronze, and it's iron, and it's steel, and then somehow it falls apart and crashes. And then that represented the four empires that I just mentioned before. Now, the other dream that he had that's also very, very important is he sees a ram and a goat on a hill, and it's a stream, and the goat is on the bottom of the hill by the stream, and he basically sees the ram come with one horn, charging down from the hill, and just basically destroys the goat, and then the ram falls down, and his horn breaks into four pieces. So he had no idea what this meant, and then the prophet Daniel was able to decipher this dream. And now we know, when we read the Old Testament, the prophecy of Daniel, that he was talking about the kingdom of the Greeks. This is the first united kingdom of the Greeks. This is prophesied 300 years, about 200-300 years before Alexander the Great, by the prophet Daniel, as he's reading this dream of the king Nebuchadnezzar. And basically, Alexander is the ram, the goat is Darius. Alexander swiftly, and it's always swiftly because Alexander conquers the Persian Empire in 13 years, or 12, 13 years, the quickest ever for any person to defeat an empire undefeated and do so much. And then his horn breaks, the one horn, into four. And that's deciphered as the four kingdoms that emerge out of Alexander's death from the empire, the four Hellenistic other kingdoms. Ptolemy in Egypt being one, Seleucus, Antiochus, and Cassander. So there's four generals after the takeover when he dies, and that was already prophesied in the Bible. So that's something very unique about Alexander. So when we're talking about somebody that's kind of divine, has this, you might say the Holy Spirit in him, whatever, he was not a normal, he was a superhuman almost person, always in action, always moving, restless. This is Alexander. So Darius now leaves, he's running away, and there's one more battle, the Battle of Hydaspes. And that's takes place in what is now Pakistan, in back then northern India. And what is very important about this battle, and very interesting, and again, I'm not trying to give you too much information, but this is important. He defeats a giant named Porus, an Indian king, a satrap, and this is the first time they have to fight elephants. Now imagine this giant beast, an elephant that weighs 10,000 pounds, is almost like over 10 feet tall, and there's a small fortress on top of it, armored with people, shooting arrows at you and spears, like a tank. And the Greeks have to face these things for the first time. Now the horses are scared. Usually horses are scared of the elephants and their smell, and they were terrified. Alexander eventually figured out the best way to kill them by killing them on their belly with the spears. So hold steady, kill point the spear under their belly and just kill the elephants. And that's how he was able to cause mayhem in the Indian camp and defeat Porus. And when he faced off Porus, he asked him, "How do you want to be treated?" And Porus asked like a king. And Alexander was so impressed by Porus because he was a great fighter. He was a great, warrior king, and he gave him a run for his money. But he also felt that he could make him into a friend and an ally, and actually gave him more land than he had before from the other rival satrapies of Indians. And Porus becomes his friend, and there's an alliance that's made. So this is it. And then obviously, after we come to India, the Macedonian troops and the rest of the Greeks, this is a small army of 47,000 soldiers. 47,000 soldiers now beat a million army strong, anywhere between 250,000 to 1 million. Sources vary. The largest army of the world. They defeat them. They go through deserts on foot, on horse, in Afghanistan, where even modern Soviet tanks could not win in the 70s. I mean, this is Alexander did that, and he was undefeated. So he goes to India, and his Macedonian troops, who were there from the very beginning, the companions and the main, bulk of the army, refused to go any farther. They heard there were like jungles,
diseases, monkeys, crazy other animals, and other more, people that were even stronger than the Indians, and they had other beasts, and they refused to go any farther. So Alexander was, unfortunately annoyed, but he chose to go down and explore the Ganges and the rivers, to go down to the Indian Ocean. So he didn't go their way. He wanted to go, and he went farther south, and then back with his ships to Babylon. So as he was planning to invade now Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, and go into Europe, he dies of either malaria, assassination, the wounds, we don't know, heavy drinking, or a bunch of different things. And who does he leave his empire? His deathbed, he says, to the strongest. So obviously his successors, the generals, fought, and this is where most history books kind of turn. They kind of make the rest of this history. They find it boring. The scholars of 100 years ago, they just didn't want to explain it any farther, and they say, this is it. Alexander conquers the world in 12 years, and he builds all these cities, over 77 cities, either built from scratch or repurposed. He brings state, amphitheaters, gymnasiums, schools, the Greek culture from Greece all the way to India and to Egypt and to all these other places in the Middle East to this day. And he built civilization, and it's a synergy. He was not just a conqueror. He took from the native peoples and mixed, and they came up with something that's called the Hellenistic age. It's a mixture of the native civilizations with Hellenic, with the Greek. But the Greek language was dominant. Gods got mixed and other ideas, but basically the bulk of Hellenism spread through Alexander to the east, and then that paved the way for Christianity about 300 years later. And then with Constantine the Great, 300 years after Christ, we have the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, which continues Alexander's legacy. All right. So here we see Aristotle, who was Alexander the Great's tutor, in the drachma. Alexander, Aristotle. As I mentioned, Alexander the Great founds the Hellenistic age, which spans from 356 BC to 10 AD. That's Greece's first Macedonian dynasty and global empire. And what's very unique about the part that Ptolemy takes over in Egypt, that's the most women ruled on par with men was in Ptolemaic Egypt. Cleopatra, the famous Cleopatra VII of Shakespearean fame, had the affairs with Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, was Greek, Macedonian, and the last descendant of the Ptolemies. She died in 30 BC. And what's also interesting is both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were Hellenists. That means they wanted to be like Alexander the Great and move to Egypt with Cleopatra, who to the Ptolemies believed that they were gods, and they wanted to recreate Alexander's empire, but in the West. So as I mentioned, in India and this peninsula, which now is also where the Greeks were in Pakistan, Afghanistan region of the Indian peninsula, there was a Greco-Bactrian kingdom that forms. That's a breakaway kingdom from Seleucus, who's the king of the East. And from them, they break away after another Persian empire evolves, called the Parthian Empire, and breaks the Greeks from the rest of the West in the Mediterranean, from the Greeks of the East now. So this Greco-Bactrian kingdom lasts up until 10 AD, as I mentioned, and then as a kingdom that comes out of that, and they conquered northern India again, all the way to central India, and it's called the Indo-Greek kingdom. So we have two kingdoms, the Indo-Greek kingdom and the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, which most history doesn't, explain how these things happened. And this is very important because these kingdoms lasted as long as the British held India, almost 300 years. So up until 10 AD, Greeks ruled central northern India. They helped influence early Buddhism in this area called Gandhara, where Buddha began. And this is where another interesting moment in time comes. This synergy that's unique with the coming of Alexander, basically helps shape the other old civilizations and kicks them into jump-starting their own empires, the Indians and the Chinese. Because prior to Alexander, there were also like little individual kingdom satrapies that were fighting each other. So the Indians, under the first king, Chandragupta, who was a contemporary of Seleucus, the general of Alexander that takes over the eastern part of the empire, basically has a marriage alliance with Seleucus. Seleucus wanted to conquer more of India, and he couldn't because of the elephants. And Chandragupta gave him more pleasing terms that he gave his daughter in exchange for conquering the elephants, which Seleucus was able to take into conquering the other civil wars that he had. So at this point in time, the generals of Alexander were all competing who's going to conquer more land. So this is what what's going on. This is what basically is happening with Alexander's empire at this time. And some of the modern historians kind of like don't acknowledge that much is happening, and they kind of like, you know, leave the era with Alexander the Great and ignore the other 300 years because basically the soldiers and the warrior kings fought each other. And what is there to do when basically you run the world that you're going to compete with the other empires of the time, which will all be Greek rival empires. So they will fight each other. But at the same time, they build cities, and they build the modern world that we come from. The city of Antioch is built by Antiochus, Alexandria from Alexander and then Ptolemy, all the Alexandrias and Antiochs and all these other cities. So to bring it a little farther ahead, St. Paul, when he goes on his missionary work, you know, he has a vision of a tall Macedonian man in his dream, and he invited him to come to Greece and into the north in Macedonia, where St. Paul actually in his second journey traveled extensively into Macedonia. So that's how important Macedonia was under the Roman Empire. The theme of all of Greece was basically Macedonia. That's what it was called. And then we have the 1100-year reign of the Byzantine Empire from 330 AD to 1461 AD, which begins with Constantine the Great. And as you see here in the coin, Constantine is the successor of Alexander, another Greco-Roman or Greek. And basically the Byzantine Empire continues the legacy of the Greeks as they take over the Eastern Roman Empire. And we see another map here of Justinian the Great. And there's another Macedonian dynasty, the last 200 years. That's how important Alexander's legacy was. Basil the Bulgar Slayer, you know, made the golden age of Byzantium and the Macedonian Renaissance in Byzantine times, 988 AD. I have lectures on this and topics you can see in Hellenic History series. It's the Macedonian Empire of the Byzantine Empire. Now, since we're talking about Christianity and Byzantine times, what does that have to do with Alexander the Great? Well, we just said there's a Macedonian dynasty that forms for 200 years. It's the greatest dynasties of Byzantium. It's a golden age. Now, Alexander's legacy and importance becomes it's very unique. Every race that he conquered or liberated from the Persians, they worshipped him as a god or as a hero. So you would think he was somebody that they, you know, aside from the Persians, obviously, they wouldn't like to a certain extent. Why would the Turks love him? Why would the Mongols? Why would the Scandinavians? Why would the Germans? The French, the Armenians, the Ethiopians, they all made legends. It's called the Alexander Romance. And basically, he becomes a philosopher king and a Byzantine emperor. This is what the Alexander Romance is. And there's many books. This is one. I'm going to show you the one that you're seeing on your screen. I also have from the Venice Hellenic Institute Codex. That's a very important one. It's the Greek one.
And along with the Bible, the Iliad, and the Odyssey, Alexander the Great lives on as a Byzantine emperor and a philosopher king in Byzantium. This is one of the most widely circulated books of the Middle Ages, and it's translated into 17 languages from England and Iceland to Persia, Egypt, and Russia. So in the Middle Ages, you either knew the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Bible, and then you knew the Alexander Romance. And there were legends that he went in the Nile in a submarine made out of glass, that he closed the barbarians from coming down from the Caucasus, the biblical monsters of Gog and Magog. He built a wall to keep them up in the Caucasus. He went to fight with Amazons. Everybody, please keep quiet. He flew with monsters. He flew in the sky. I mean, he becomes like a superhero. And for 1,000 years, basically, his legend grew even more in the Christian times, in both in the Greek East of Eastern Europe, in Byzantium, and Western Europe. The Arthurian legends are influenced by Alexander, and so many other the knights. Now, here are some images from the Alexander Romance. Alexander becomes a full Byzantine emperor. And after that, we come to modern times in the 90s, when Greece actually honored him during the monarchy in the 30s with money of Alexander the Great, and then in the 90s with Alexander the Great drachma, 100 drachma coin that you can see right here. And if you happen to have these, you're in luck. Now they could go up for $300 to $400. Now, Macedonia itself was not liberated again when the Turks took over, up until 1912. And there were Macedonian fighters, Makedonομάχοι, Dragoumis, Pavlos Melas, that struggled to liberate Macedonia and northern Greece. The war began from 1897 and on. It was a Macedonian committee depicting Alexander the Great and Basil the Bulgar Slayer from 1903 that was created to liberate Macedonia from the Ottoman Empire. Pavlos Melas, famous Macedonian fighters. And then some modern maps of the Balkan states in the Balkan Wars, when Macedonia was liberated in 1912 in the Balkan Wars. You can see a poster on the right. And then we have other issues that we're not going to go into this with Macedonia, that Tito, the Yugoslavian president in the 40s, it's a communist. He wants to basically take over northern Greece and the port of Thessaloniki, at first with the aid from the Soviets, to create this fake Macedonia to take over Thessaloniki and northern Greece with the aid of the Greek communists. And this begins even with the Bulgarians early in the 1900s. Even before that, they start this, because Macedonia plays a big role in also Slavic history, like the region, not the history itself, but it's a big area that moves Macedonia and becomes very important to other people as well. And that actually becomes very problematic, and even is the beginning of World War I that takes place in Macedonia. So now there's another country to the north, this former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, that claims this name with other powers that are involved to destabilize northern Greece, and so forth. We're not going to talk about that. Here's another poster of Alexander the Great. What I do want to talk about very quickly, just to wrap up, let's go back to a more pleasant picture. There we go, Alexander. So Alexander the Great not only transcends the ancient world, he becomes a pharaoh to the Egyptians. And there's many stories. You can have courses on Alexander the Great. I can't go over every single detail and story about him. He becomes obviously very important to the Greeks, to the Romans, who consider him the first great person. It's the Romans that actually give him the label Megas, Magnus, Alexander the Great, because he was one of the greatest generals. The top 3 generals of the ancient world, the Romans consider Alexander to be the greatest. His cousin Pyrrhus of Epirus II, of the Pyrrhic victory fame, and Hannibal.
Barca. So those are the three top generals of the ancient world. And Alexander's legacy, I recommend one modern book. It's called Lessons from the Great Empire Builder Alexander the Great's Art of Strategy. Partha Bose. He's an Indian author. And I mean, there's many books that are written, but he actually argues how the book provides the wisdom and the secrets of this great empire builder, demonstrating how they can be applied to conquer today's challenges. Being a AHEPA, and we're a networking organization, you can learn a lot from this book. Blending insights from his years of business experience with his lifelong study of Alexander, Partha Bose interweaves, he's in Britain now, a gripping biography with compelling analysis of the strategies, tactics, and leadership approaches of successful institutions, including Dell, GE, Honda, IKEA, the Harvard Law School, and the East India Company. Individuals such as Elizabeth I, Winston Churchill, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Bernard Montgomery, Gandhi, Jack Welch, and Lou Gerstner. So Alexander keeps on influencing people, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the conversation, up until now. Business tycoons, corporations, General Schwarzkopf, like other generals that use his tactics to win modern wars. That's how great he was. And as I also mentioned, he built over 77 cities, which, if you compare Genghis Khan and the Mongols that conquered a bigger area of the world and basically looted and destroyed everything, Alexander built. That's why he's remembered and he's revered. And he loved women. This is what a hero does. Darius's own mother loved Alexander because he treated her like his own mother, and he liberated the harem. And when Darius, basically when Alexander died, Darius's own mother, who loved him so much, committed suicide. She couldn't stand living, without him afterwards. So that is somebody that transcends every race and every ethnicity, and many peoples of the world claim to be also descendants of Alexander the Great. So as Greeks, we should honor Alexander. We should teach him to our kids, his legacy, this 300 years of when the Greeks ruled the world, which is called the Golden Age of Greece, where the city of Alexandria, Antioch, the beginnings of Beirut, Damascus, Kandahar, all these cities were built during this era, which is the foundation of the modern world, which becomes even more important during the Byzantine era, which without him, Christianity would not exist to the extent that we know it, because he brought the Greek language, this thing called the lingua franca, the 𝘾𝙆, which is the common Greek. He brought it to the ends of the world, and he was able to spread the literature through that. And the Old Testament will be translated into Greek in the Septuagint, and the New Testament will be written in Greek. Okay, so when people talk about the Bible, there's an Old Testament, there's a Greek New Testament, and the saints, all the church fathers, all the ecumenical councils, all those are indirectly attributed to the success of Alexander conquering the Persians and establishing Greek rule throughout the Middle East, the Far East, and Eastern Europe. I've done a lot of works with my Ben Porphyra. We did a educational historical epic about Anna Porphyrogenita and Vladimir the Great, as Anastasia mentioned earlier. This is Basil the Booger Slayer's sister, and how the Russians came into the Byzantine sphere. And I'm working on the Greek Revolution and a musical with Mandou Mavrogiannous and Dimitrios Ypsilantis. And as I mentioned from the very beginning, me and my colleagues, we have formed the Hellenic History series, which I want you to further, look into the stuff that we've done. And we've cataloged now a lot of old movies, cartoons, and series that you don't see anymore. You gain rights, licensing, and other information that we collected to bring them. There's a lot of movies about Alexander the Great. There's an Indian epic that is the beginning of Bollywood, with one of the famous Bollywood directors and actors called Sikandar, that was in 1941, that we have here with English subtitles. You need to watch that. It's a story of Alexander and Aristotle. And the Indian market loves Alexander. There was another movie, a very famous movie of Alexander in 1965. And the past 4 years, there's a series with Sony
in a big Indian company that they made Alexander versus Porus, the Indian king movies. These are high def, big budget movies of Alexander the Great, and he's Greek. He's from Macedonia. There's no monkey business, and even the Indians love Alexander. Even though he conquered them, they treat him as a hero and somebody that's worthy to be emulated and honored. So we have William Shatner's Alexander the Great cartoons. There's many other cultural things, and on the bottom we have our original programs, the Quest for Prometheus, which I've done with my friend partner George Selinsky, cooking shows with Destiny and Chrissochos, my wife. And those you can also find on the YouTube, and you can find on our Hellenic History Series Patreon page, which basically for $1 you can become a patron a month. We need your support to make original programming. Right now I'm working on the First World War with documentary with original archival pictures that I have and footage. We're doing 3D animation about the Greeks, the Serbs, the retreat of the Serbian army to Corfu, the national schism, to kind of bring light into that history of World War I of Greece and what was going on between the Balkan Wars and after the catastrophe of Smyrna. And I can use your support even for $1 a month. And you can see all our programs too. They're all on Patreon, on YouTube, on Facebook. We do different things. And we also have, as I mentioned, cartoons, stuff in Greek. We try to get things in English subtitles or Greek. So you want to see an Alexander movie tonight, go to Hellenic History Series on YouTube, or the Battle of Arbela, the show that I showed you earlier about Alexander, on Patreon or on Facebook. All right, that's all.
Billy, I want to thank you. Billy, I want to thank you very much for being here tonight with us as our special guest presenter. We want to thank you for once again coming and doing the Hellenic History Series here at the AHEPA family of Hempstead. You mentioned before that Alexander, he played the flute, he sang, he danced. He had the Persian Empire where he conquered in 13 years. He did 77 cities. He built amphitheaters, gymnasiums, Greek culture. He gave way to Christianity. I think these are all fabulous contributions that we can learn, and we have learned from your Hellenic History Series tonight. We do have a few questions for you, so I will kindly say that anybody who does have a question, kindly type it in your chat box there, and then I will ask them to Brother Billy Chrissochos. So the first question we have tonight is from a Sammy Thomas asking, how were the Greeks able to defeat the stronger Persian forces? So again, that's how were the Greeks able to defeat the stronger Persian forces? That's the first question we have for you tonight, Brother Billy Chrissochos. That's from Sammy Thomas.
Sammy, that's a great question, and we tackled this on that show, The Quest for Prometheus, the Battle of Arbela episode. I'll give it to you. They made technological improvements. Philip II, Alexander's father, reinvented the spear that the hoplites used. These are the armored soldiers of the time for like about 600 years from after the Bronze Age and all that stuff. The people fought on fields, like the army faced the other army, and they had to wear all this clunky armor. The helmets, evolved a little bit better, but the main thing was the shield, which was used as a weapon and to protect the guy next to you. So you were in a phalanx, like a soldiers lined up, and then behind and behind and behind. And you had the spear. Now the Macedonian spear, which was the better version that Philip made from the Theban spear, and what the Spartans used to use, was called the 𝘾𝙨𝙨. It was like 18 feet tall. Imagine this 18-foot tall metal spear with a pike in the end. All right, carrying it. That nobody could get near them, and they just basically like a tank trounced everybody, and they were able to defeat many of the Persians, which didn't have armor. The Persians had more clothes and things of that sort, because there were also different, except for the bodyguards, the main shock troops of Darius. The rest of the Persians had clothes, because they were made out of different peoples from their empire. And the other thing that was invented at this time was something called Alexander. When you see in that mosaic and his armor is kind of made of it's called linothorax. It's like modern Kevlar. It's made of linen and leather, and it was almost impregnable. Given a modern bullet cannot pierce this, the linothorax, and that was invented by Alexander and Philip. So that's already it's two things. They used the horses more in the cavalry, which was made more important in the campaigns, which were underused in the Greek battles before, and also the 𝘾𝙧𝙞𝙀𝙧, the shield bearers, these other troops that were able to fight with the long shields. They could use as weapons, as shields on the horses. So he made technological advancements, and up until like later, the Roman legions, the Sarissa and the phalanx were undefeated. And he was even able to adapt to the elephant. Imagine an elephant with a taro on him and guys shooting arrows at you, and all this other stuff, and they were able to figure out tactically how to best the elephant and this animal. And these are some of the things. He was also able to bring with him eventually, when they went into the Middle East, farther into the Persian Empire, they had scientists with him, anthropologists, botanists that will explore and take samples of wildlife and plants, and doctors with them, and people that were able to cook and maintain an army. Basically, you're living in the army, which was never done before. Like usually the ancient Greeks, prior to him and other peoples, fought in the summer or the spring when it was nice, and then went back to their homes to tend to their fields, because they were agricultural people. The Macedonian army was an army. Your job was the army, was war, and he was able to take there were other people that came along, not just the 47,000 soldiers, like another 100,000 of women and then the cooks and people that would clean. So they were able to live and fight. That's what he made differently, and he was able to go into the deserts and fight all these battles and win.
Great. Thank you, brother Billy. The next question we have is from brother Anton Scribanik. How long was Aristotle a tutor for Alexander the Great?
So Aristotle never left Macedonia. So basically, when Alexander was I guess 21, they wrote letters back and forth afterwards, and he never saw him, or he never got a chance to go back to Macedonia. So up to for 20 years, his first 20 years or so, he was his tutor, and then they continued having dialogues and letters and talking about the world and what he was discovering. Aristotle tried to give him his point of view, that everybody else was a barbarian. The Greeks were superior. Alexander saw that as he moved farther away from Greece, that is not the best way to deal with other peoples and other civilizations. He even had his 15,000 soldiers marry Persian nobility women. He had like a mass wedding in Susa. That's not to say he wasn't Greek. He was 100% Greek, but he actually saw the Persians as another people who were similar to us, and they were, even ethnically to a certain extent. Darius's grandmother was Greek, but Aristotle didn't like that kind of stuff. But they were friendly to each other. But he was his tutor for the first 20 years living in Macedonia.
Great. Thank you, brother Billy. The next question I have is from Georgios Kosmas, asking, Brother Georgios asks, how accurate was the movie Alexander, the blockbuster hit that was released in 2004?
Well, it wasn't a blockbuster hit. It failed miserably because it was not accurate. Now, I actually own armor and stuff from shields and helmets from this movie. We bought props and we used them in the Alexander the Great Living History Society. The sequences you will see and the battles were very accurate and very real. They were recreated. But like Oliver Stone's movie made him into homosexual. He was an alcoholic. It was all stuff that has nothing to do with the sources, and that's what things that he puts in all his movies.
That's why it flunked. It didn't have a soul. And there was a movie made earlier in the 1956, I believe, with Richard Burton. That was the Alexander the Great first movie. Actually, the first one is the Indian film, which is amazing, but then that predates that movie and even Ben-Hur. And then 1956, Hollywood makes one of Alexander the Great, which is actually much better, and I recommend that. And there's other movies that are documentaries from the History Channel, Alexander, God of War, stuff like that. They're actually very good. But that movie, unfortunately, the Oliver Stone one, is not good. Aside from the costumes and the battles, yes. But the story was just fiction. It was based off a book of, I believe, Mary Renaud. It has nothing to do with the sources, you know. So it was inaccurate. It was inaccurate.
Very good. Thank you, Brother Billy Chrissochos. We appreciate you coming on with us tonight. You had mentioned earlier about a book that was, I believe, an Indian author. You picked it up before. You know, we couldn't really. Could you kindly just hold it up one more time for us? We appreciate it.
Yeah,
I believe that's it. Okay, so Alexander the Great's Art of Strategy, and if you could just lift that up for one more second. So that's with Partha Bose. Am I saying that correct?
Yeah, he's a British Indian author.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We appreciate
it. Tells you everything of how, like, you know, from Honda, IKEA, all these important people, they study Alexander the Great and their business tactics. You know, he's not a stagnant person. Like if you study Alexander, aside from the fancy tales and other things, you can actually learn and you can grow your business and be able to deal with people better. You know, you don't have to read The Art of War only.
Right.
Well, and one thing I forgot to mention, Alexander had 4 wives. Roxanne was the one he loved, the Persian one. He had 1 son who was a little bit, I think something was wrong with him, slow. But he was killed by Cassander, one of the generals that succeeded him after his death. He's the guy that made Thessaloniki, the modern city. He killed Alexander's family, unfortunately. And Thessaloniki was was basically mentioned when Philip, the beginning of the city, beat the Thessalians, the victory over the Thessalians. That was the second big city of Greece, and up to now, Thessaloniki. And his sister, one of his half sisters, was called Thessaloniki. Got to mention it. All right. Any other questions?
I was just typing into this the book that you showed just so people can see it. It's Alexander the Great. The author is Partha Bose, and you mentioned that you said the 2004 version was very controversial and wasn't really based off the facts.
And it flanked, you know. It showed in the box office. It didn't do good at all.
So you said that the History Channel, I'm sorry, Brother Billy, you said that the History Channel had also some very good educational
yes.
Content for Alexander the Great. And
they always come up with different ones. They're pretty good. If you contact me through, Facebook or through the Hellenic History series, I definitely want to put some more of those books and movies up. We have on a YouTube channel. If you go there, Hellenic History series on YouTube, subscribe. You'll find a lot of this stuff.
Great.
And look at the sources. Like many people write books.
Yes.
What I would look for to avoid it's propaganda. Because I went to Queen's College and I had professors too that did stuff on Alexander the Great and they wrote books. I won't mention names. Usually, a professor has a niche. And it's if he's an alcoholic or wine expert or somebody, he'll make Alexander into an alcoholic. We're very pro-Greek. If he has an agenda with the Skopjans, he'll make him, called Macedonian, not Greek.
So is a biased point of view.
They might make him, like a homosexual, which is not in the sources, doesn't exist. There's one instance, actually, the Roman author, the Latin guy, Quintus Curtius Rufus, was very biased when he wrote about Alexander. And there was a boy, a dancer from the harems, the Persians have male harems as well, and he danced on him, and Alexander was very polite to him, and he kissed him on the cheek. And apparently, kissing somebody on the cheek was not, seemed very, very masculine, and the Romans took that, and Quintus Curtius wrote that, and that's what they based his stuff off, from this one source, which is not the main sources. He was polite, right? Now with the alcoholism,
I see that a lot, and Macedonians drank a lot. Now, what makes Alexander different and what made him basically conquer the world was he didn't do any of that stuff, at least in the very beginning of his career. He was not, focused on women and alcohol. He was not. He was focused on conquering the earth. I mean, he thought he was, like somebody special, like a god. His ancestors were Achilles and Hercules. When he got older and he conquered more of the Persian Empire, he got into the bigger parties and stuff like that, and he drank a lot more. But I just read that book from the other day, and I didn't read it. I just saw the beginning, and I'm like, oh, he was, as a youth, he was an alcoholic. I'm like, no, he's not. He's not an Irishman. I mean, that's not what made him this great tactician. It's like saying Edgar Allan Poe was only an alcoholic, and that's what made him, a great writer. It's not.
I understand.
He had issues, and he might have drank, but that's not what made him the great writer that he was. Alcoholism. I don't know what else.
So, well, then I guess a good way to start is to definitely go off of the book that you told us that was authored by Partha Bose and some others. Go to your web YouTube channel as well for Hellenic History series, and
on Patreon, support us on Patreon, even $1, once a month. We're doing actually graphics, documentaries. We have a lot already. We're gonna do more advanced videos on Alexander, on Macedonia, on Byzantium, on many different topics, on mythology. This is what I'm doing with a small group, and we're trying to build it, because every time you do these kind of shows, if you've seen documentaries like on Kings and Generals, those other online good documentaries, that requires a lot of money, a lot of research. We have the research, but you have to make it. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to research, pre-production, production, post-production, all this stuff to make these things go into maybe the History Channel or Netflix or more professional documentaries. We need support. And as far as also the YouTube, I love for you to sit down with your kids and watch some of those shows or cartoons. They're light.
Really, it's fantastic. I have to ask you one more thing before I let you go. I noticed the picture here. Is that you in the picture with Alexander there? Posing as Alexander? I noticed it's a great photo.
I put myself in there a little bit, I guess, yeah.
Brother Billy Chrissochos, we thank you so much for being here tonight. The AHEPA family of Hempstead thanks you very much for coming in and being a special guest presenter this evening for our Hellenic History series. And we appreciate you allowing us to use the Hellenic History series name to promote Hellenism in the name of education. So we thank you again.
A pleasure.
For coming. And we thank all our viewers and everybody who tuned in tonight to see this. We appreciate it. We thank you all very, very much, and we wish you all a good night. Thank you.
I thank AHEPA, the Catholic chapter, the family of Hempstead, Brother Anastasi, Brother Dean, Brother Demi, and everybody that's here tonight. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure, and I hope to see you on many more of these kind of lectures.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again, Brother Billy, and thank you everybody for being in tonight. Have a good night, all.